And now, the 2017 honoree, born in Webster, South Dakota, an avid hunter and fisherman. His dad gave him his first gun when he was 12, a lever-action Marlin 22. It's all about being outdoors for this lifelong sportsman, although he spent much of his adult life in New York City, where he was an anchor of the NBC Nightly News from 1982 to 2004. He's a journalist. He's an author of books, including the bestseller, The Greatest Generation. A DuPont Columbia Award winner, a 2-time Peabody Award winner, an 11-time Emmy Award winner, a recipient of the Edward R. Murrow Lifetime Achievement Award, a member of the Television Hall of Fame, and in 2014, he received the Presidential Medal of Freedom. But to you and me, he's simply a fellow sportsman. The winner of the 2017 T. Boone Pickens Lifetime Sportsman Award, please help me welcome to the stage, everyone, Mr. Tom Brokaw. Tom, how are you?
Thank you.
You're more than welcome. You're more than welcome over. Let's
I'm
sit.
not just in tall cotton here in Texas. I'm among the kind of people I want to hang out with as much as I possibly can. I've never heard from so many people tonight, all claiming to have the best quail operation in Texas. I gave them my phone number and my address and told them I'm available.
What do you, did you see this back here? What do you think of this backdrop? Do you know, did you look at that?
I do.
Have you been there?
That's the 4th of July in Montana. The snow in the background.
Who's that guy holding that rainbow?
That's me. That's in 1989, I decided we needed to have property in Montana. My wife thought it was the worst idea I could possibly have had. I was deep into fly fishing. I wanted to have a place where I could shoot as well. So I found a ranch south of Livingston, 5,000 acres. Didn't know what the hell I was doing, except it had a great trout stream on it, and it had a good bird population. Meredith said, it's the worst idea you've ever had. I'm never going. And about 6 months later, I finally persuaded her to make a small weekend visit. At the end of the weekend, she said to me, we go to New York tomorrow, we sell everything we have, and we move to Montana. And the most gratifying part of it for us has been, without question, that our daughters, who were then teenagers and in college, and now our granddaughters and grandson, are as taken with that ranch, and it's changed their lives in ways that we could never have anticipated. They live in Los Angeles and San Francisco and New York, but their hearts are in Montana at all times. And it's quite thrilling, having grown up in South Dakota and small towns, for me to be able to recapture that culture for my big city kids and grandchildren. And it's going to be a part of their legacy. And I couldn't be happier about it. I've got one granddaughter who keeps a large shoebox in her room at the ranch, and it's labeled Great Horned Owl Scat. And she goes out every day and goes through the scat to see it. And they all call me Tom because they saw me on television first. She'll say, look, Tom, at the size of the rat that owl caught last night. And I have to look into her box and look at the rat. So I think that's the best kind of biology for a young student.
Well, we talked to your ranch manager, and we said, what's his favorite room? What will make him most comfortable? And he said he has a room he sits in, he reads the paper, he has a cup of coffee in the morning, and so he took this picture for us and sent it here, and we had that backdrop made, just a little something to make you a little more comfortable tonight, just to remind you of a place you love so much.
It does, and that's the weather there at this time of the year. When I left Nightly News, I thought I could go to Montana and spend a lot of time in the off-season, in the wintertime, and write, because I would be out there by myself and wouldn't have to worry about anything. And I went through a force 5 blizzard to get to the ranch the first time. And after about 3 days, I called a friend of mine in New York, and I said, here's the deal on Montana in the wintertime. Because of the satellite, I can watch nightly news at 4:30. That means I can start drinking at 5. And I'm in bed passed out by 7. And he said to me, oh, I finally got Montana. So it's tough at this time of the year, but it's part of the passion that we all have to be out there in the elements.
I understand. We're happy that you're here tonight with us, and this award that you've been honored with tonight, tell us what it means to you.
Well, it means a great deal to me because it recognizes me outside of the field for which I'm best known. From the earliest memories of my life, having grown up on the Missouri River in South Dakota, I wanted to be outdoors. I had a 22, the 22 Marlin that you talked about. All of us had trap lines, and we would spend winters out in that very, very harsh part of the world in these cheap Army surplus sleeping bags, and we had our favorite campsites. And it really helped form who I am, because I think everybody is equalized when you're out doing that kind of thing. And when I left South Dakota, because I wanted bright lights, big cities, and I wanted to do the kind of work I'm doing now, I hadn't been gone very long before I yearned to go back to that way of life. And so my wife and I in California started doing really arduous backpack trips in the Sierra, and then we went to Montana. We went back to South Dakota, and it makes me a complete person. If I were just living on asphalt and in high-rises in New York, I think there would be something missing from my life. But I can hit the ground running in Afghanistan or Iraq or any of the very terrible places that I've been, and I'm pretty nimble. I can adapt in part because I've spent so much time in the outdoors.
And you and Boone have been friends for a long time, haven't you?
I have.
Yeah. And tell me about your first hunting trip that you remember.
Well, I'm going to share something with you that is quite nostalgic for me. I grew up in a construction town where right after the war they were building big dams on the Missouri River, and the government came along and built this kind of classic small town. And workers came from all over America for their first great jobs. They'd gone through the Depression and the war, and now they were getting good jobs. My dad was operating heavy construction equipment, and all my friends had fathers who were bulldozer operators or driving big trucks, or they were electricians. And when I was just about 14, this terrific guy moved in from North Carolina. He was 5 years older than me, but he became like my older brother, and he became an important influence in my life. And then I lost track of him for a long time, and we reconnected. So yesterday we had a little reunion lunch in Florida, and Don looked at me and he said, I finally can tell you something I kept from you for a long time. And I said, what's that? He said, do you remember when I told you you ought to get involved in pheasant hunting? And I said, oh, I remember that very well, because my dad didn't hunt. You were going to take me pheasant hunting. One of my neighbors gave me a shotgun that I could use. And you took me out pheasant hunting. And he said, yeah, I was not as generous as you thought that I was. He said, I knew as a rookie you weren't going to hit anything, and I could shoot your license as well as mine. So that was my introduction to the hardcore way of life. And, but he did get me started pheasant hunting. In those days, and I really got involved in it, we all wore Army surplus jackets, and we carried a pocket full of 12-gauge shells. And if you're a working class kid, you'd maybe have a Remington Wingmaster. The car dealers' kids and the doctors' kids had Browning automatics, and we kind of looked down on them because they could just fire away as long as they wanted to. And I continued to hunt all the way through college, and South Dakota in those days was not as organized as it is now. But in 1968, I gave up my guns. I was living in Los Angeles. I had 3 little girls, and everybody was getting shot, and I thought, I've got to walk away from this. Till I got to New York, and a lot of people were making a lot of money, didn't know what to spend it on, so they were buying very fancy shotguns and inviting me to the shooting clubs north of the city, and it all came back. And then I wanted as much of it as I could possibly get, and it's been a really important part of my life. I've hunted quail in New Mexico, in Baja, in South Texas, in Florida, and I'm here to tell you that there are at least a half a dozen coveys of quail in South Georgia who tonight are having a belly laugh when they heard that I was being honored as a man of the year. Because they mocked me all last Saturday morning as they flew by me. But I did catch up to them later in the day and got their attention.
But you still go back. We have some video of you hunting in South Dakota, pheasant hunting. You still go back every year, and you kind of reconnect, don't you?
Well, I explained to my friends in New York who don't always understand this. I said, look, pheasant hunting is a religious holiday in South Dakota. You've got to go back for it. And I do reconnect with my friends, and it's a chance for me to work my dogs and drive across the state. You know, there's a real connection. You're a lot larger and a lot richer in Texas, but you attract the same kind of people as we do in South Dakota. People who've built that state with their hands. And the small towns, we were just talking tonight about one town that's had 2 basketball state champions and 2 football state champions at the same time. I can name every little town in South Dakota that's won the state B basketball championship. And I drive through those towns, and I feel like I'm home again. And I think it's made me a better journalist over the years, because when I'm in some remote place, where I'm in China or in Southeast Asia, or for that matter in Moscow, I'm always wondering, am I relating to the people I grew up with on Main Street? Do they understand why this is important? Am I telling this in a way that's going to help them understand their world and maybe even improve their own lives as they begin to deal with this ever smaller globe that we live on?
And you know, for you, like many people that are here tonight, it's about the dogs too. And you've had some great dogs through the years, and you have one right now that you were telling me earlier you just absolutely love.
Well, I'll tell you about one dog. When our kids left, and by then I was really not shooting again, my wife went to Aspen and saw this fabulous litter and brought home one and said, we need a dog, Tom. We've got an empty nest. This is Red that you're looking at now. Is another great dog, but we've been very lucky. And so we got this dog called her Sage, and Sage turned out to be 1 in 10 million. Sent her to a trainer north of New York City who said, you celebrities all dog. I don't know whether I can do anything with your dog. You know what I'm talking about. And I went up there kind of humble and said, well, just see what you can do. And he called me 2.5 weeks later. He said, come get your dog. And I said, oh my God, that bad? He said, I've never had a dog like this. He said that dog got it within a week and then became kind of legendary, frankly, in the hunting world. Terry Ring, who runs a place called Silver Creek in Sun Valley, some of you may have been there. He's one of the great Western sportsmen. He said, I've just never seen a better dog. And she was unbelievably instructive to the next dog that we got, which was a little black lab from Scotland. It had been used mostly on driven hunts. And the first time we put her in the field, she was completely confused. She was looking for a high-flying bird and not expected to go anything. Honest to God, this dog, Sage, turned around, nuzzled her as if to say, come on, dummy, follow me, and taught her by the end of the day about how to do flush pheasants and retrieve them. So it's been a hugely important part of our lives. We have that dog that you saw there, and we have one now coming of age at Wild Rose Kennels in Mississippi. Some of you may know about that place. And we'll be picking her up in about 4 weeks. And it's really added meaning to our lives, and certainly it means add meaning to being out in the field with them and watching them work, which is half the thrill.
Yeah, you know, you think about the pheasants that you've shot over the years, and you think of the Huns that you've shot in Montana or sharp-tails, and you've had some pretty good quail stories. Tell everybody the story about your trip down to South Texas with 2 people I think they'll all know.
Yeah. Well, the first time I really went quail hunting, I have to give you a little background of this. When I was a reporter in Washington, it was during the era when Jim Baker, your fellow Texan, had most of the important positions, Chief of Staff to Ronald Reagan, Secretary of State, Secretary of the Treasury. And we had a very, very strong professional relationship. I mean, he wouldn't tell me things he didn't want to tell me, and I wasn't afraid to ask him the tough questions, but it was always at a very professional level. And I knew that he was interested in the outdoors. I knew he was a great hunter. I'll tell you a quick story about how that figured into his diplomacy as well. And when I left Nightly News, I got a call from Jim in Houston. He said, Brokaw, now we can be friends because we're no longer involved in a professional relationship. I want you to come down and go quail hunting with me. I said, you know, I really haven't done much quail hunting in my life, very little, in fact. He said, no, but you're going to enjoy this. So I went out and tuned up a little bit, and then I'm still very anxious and nervous about this. And I became very anxious and nervous when on the first morning I'm approaching a covey, dogs are on point. I have the former Secretary of State on my left and the former President of the United States on my right. And I think I can get in so much damn trouble here, I can't tell you. only shoot blue sky, and it's got to be very blue sky if you're going to be shooting. And it worked out very well. And I've been going back every year. And then he said, I know Meredith loves to ride. That's my wife. Why doesn't she come down and ride with the Outriders? Well, you all know Outriders. They're really skeptical about a woman coming in from New York and getting on the horse with them at 7 in the morning. Now they don't care if I come back every year. They just want to, is Mrs. Brokaw going to come back again? So it's really become a family affair. And she's got a great eye for coveys, I must say. We look out and she's holding up the twig and they're there, so we count on her.
What's your favorite place to hunt?
Well, I've divided two parts. Going back to South Dakota is very nostalgic for me. And when you're shooting wild pheasants, which I get to do, it's thrilling, frankly, having grown up on them. And people who shoot quail primarily say, those big birds, you ought to be able to hit them. And on a cold, windy day, and they come rocketing out of there like F-18s. It's a different sport altogether. So that really is, I suppose, the seminal experience for me in bird hunting. But I've come to love quail. I love the challenge of it. I love the culture, the horses, the mule-drawn wagons, or the walk-ups that you're doing in New Mexico or here in Texas. And it is very, very challenging. Last year, I brought down to Texas some very rare vintage tequila that is made by a friend of mine in central Mexico. Very high-end stuff. And I was really pleased about sharing that with everybody the night before, and came in at lunch the next day and said, it's great tequila, it sure as hell doesn't improve your shooting, I'll tell you that. And I love the camaraderie of it, coming in for lunch, and then at the end of the day, talking about the hunt. So 2 quick stories. One is one of my favorite, I'm not going to tell you where I see this because I don't want to give it away, but one of my favorite oil paintings in Texas at a quail plantation is Lyndon Johnson out on the point shooting. Right behind him is John Connolly, and then a couple of other people from the upper echelons of Texas politics. 2 birds are falling. And I said, boy, that's something. They said, yeah, what you don't know is that the painter, just memorizing everything, painted Lyndon Johnson shooting and a bird falling, took it to the White House, and Johnson said, paint and a second bird, I want a double on that painting.
That's funny.
I can only do that in my mind. I can't commend the artist to do it. And then another story I want to tell you is that because I love pheasant hunting, and I'm very involved, as I know a lot of you are as well, with veterans organizations. And by the way, those of you who are not working with veterans on hunting, that's a great, great outlet for the people who are coming back from these wars to be taken somewhere. It really is immoral. We have less than 1% of our population in uniform and in harm's way. And this Navy SEAL that was killed over the last week was on his 13th tour. The one that he was on his 12th tour. The one that was killed earlier in Mosul was on his 13th tour. I'm about to do an event for the Army Rangers. And I promise you, most of the Rangers in that room in New York who are there to honor a fallen comrade, and many of them are grievously wounded and dealing with it, they'll come up and say, I'll say, how many tours? They'll say 10 or 11 or 12. We just can't have that go on. So I went back to Omaha at the invitation of Warren Buffett with Bob Kerrey, the former governor and senator from the state of Nebraska, who was a Navy SEAL in Vietnam, earned the Medal of Honor. And we did a successful statewide United Way hookup for them, raised a lot of money, and at the end of the weekend, the corporate sponsors said, we had a plane to bring you out here. If you want to take it somewhere else before you go back, that'd be fine. So I said to Bob, I got a friend who's got a lodge in South Dakota where we can go shoot pheasants because you can open up a week before opening day. You want to do that? He said, God, I'd love to do that. I haven't been pheasant hunting in a long time. So I called my friend and I said, I'm going to bring Bob Kerrey. And he said, oh, that'd be really exciting for everybody. So we arrive at the lodge, and Bob, extraordinarily popular. And it turns out my friend's cousin had been a Navy SEAL helicopter pilot in Vietnam. So he actually knew about Bob's unit. And it was all togetherness. And got Bob out on the range, and he shot a few clays, and we think, oh, it's going to be fine. And then we went into the fields, and he couldn't hit anything. I mean, the birds were getting up in front of him, and he was trying real hard, working too hard at it, and nobody was saying anything. And finally, on the last hunt of the second day, I said to a friend of mine, it's a very good shot, I said, get up behind Kerry and fire simultaneously on the next bird that gets up. So a bird gets up in front of Bob, and my friend is behind him and fires simultaneously. The bird drops over. Bob, my gosh, you got that bird. Isn't that great? You know, and the whole thing. And we're high-fiving him. I go back to New York, and the next day I've got to go to Walter Reed Hospital, where I visit regularly. And the orthopedic surgeon said to me, look, I've got a really tough case. I amputated a young Texas serviceman this morning below the knee. He's heavily sedated, but he'll never talk to me again unless he gets to shake your hand. So I went into the young man's room, and I was very emotionally roiled, and I leaned over and grabbed his hand, and I said, I was with a Navy SEAL this weekend who lost his leg beneath the knee in Vietnam. I couldn't keep up with him. He was over the fences and through the grass and through the brush. There is life after you go through all of this. And the young man squeezed my hand back again. I came out of there, and the surgeon said, I'm taking you to every room on our ward. You've got to tell that story again and again and again. I said, well, I did. And I got back to New York, and I called Kerry, and I was still pretty jacked up by this whole experience. And I said, Bob, you saved my life today. And he said, what do you mean? I said, I was at Walter Reed. And I said, I was meeting all these young men who'd lost a leg below the knee, just as you did. And they were obviously in heavy combat when that happened. And the only thing that got me through the day was that I told them I had taken you to South Dakota pheasant hunting, and I couldn't keep up with you as you went over the fences and through the high grass and through the deep brush, even though you were missing a leg. There was a long pause, and Kerry lowered his voice and said, you did not tell them I couldn't hit my ass, did you? I said, no, that's our secret, Bob. It got us through it. So there is something about this culture of hunting and being outdoors and shooting for sport that really does connect with these veterans who are coming home. A number of my friends in South Dakota who have lodges now have annual hunts up there and bring in these young men. And they come from all the different units. Some of them are Rangers, some of them are from special forces of one kind or another. And you can see that they feel welcome back again and that they've got a place in their lives that they can go on with. We're doing the same thing with fly fishing, by the way. Fly fishing is a hugely important, it turns out, sport for people with PTSD because they can work on their flies and small precision things and learn how to cast and catch a fish. And it concentrates them so they're not thinking about all the other things in their life.
You know, you were mentioning to me earlier that you felt like, hunting or fly fishing, but we were specifically talking hunting was a way of really bridging a gap that we have right now in our country. Would you talk about that a little bit?
Well, I feel very strong. Look, there's nobody in this room who's not paying attention to politics right now. And I think that's a good thing. However you feel about the new president or the Democrats who lost and what they're up to, what I've been saying to my colleagues is this is a very exciting time for America because everyone is now come to the table to say what are we going to do and how are we going to get to where we need to get to, however you feel about the ideology of Donald Trump or the ideology on the left or on the hard right. But the biggest single issue, in my judgment, in this country is how we can find common cause. Doesn't mean we're going to agree on everything, but there are issues that we need to come together on. So it will be our legacy to the next generation to say America's always been at its best when it was more than the sum of its parts. And we have a lot of issues in which we can agree, and we need to agree. Some of it has to do just how government functions. Then some of it has to do with the distribution of income and what we're going to do about kickstarting the economy, about what our attitude is about the Far East and the Middle East and immigrants coming into this country. But we have to have civil conversations about it. And we're not going to always agree. But we'll be better off if we find some forum in which we can talk about these issues in a way that people feel it's the essence of America, that we're not going to divide ourselves up into 20 different parts, each going in separate directions. That has never been a formula in life, in business, or in sport for success. And it can't be a formula for success unless we begin to get over that. So if you'll allow me, I have a simple metaphor that I carry around with me. I don't know how many of you are aware of this, but when the 82nd Airborne jumped into Normandy, they knew that they would be scattered when they landed, and they were much more scattered than they realized. Think about it, dark of night behind enemy lines. You're jumping out sometimes as little as 800 feet, landing in these deep woods, and your squadron is nowhere to be seen. So with the ingenuity of the time, every 82nd Airborne squad leader was given a brass clicker. And the idea was once they disposed of their parachute, they'd hunker down behind a tree and go like that. And they would hope they would hear, "I hear you, I'm coming." And that's how they put their squads together. And those men who answered did not say, "Are you a member of the Tea Party? Are you a Republican? Are you a Democrat? Because if you're that, I can't work with you." That's not what they said. What they said was, "I hear you, and I'm coming to help." Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank
That's
you.
great.
Thank you all very much. I do want to pay tribute to my great friend who did get me here, T. Boone Pickens, great American and a great companion. And I want everybody to know that that's why I'm here.